So I've decided to start back at square one over something that I've been meaning to get more into lately. I'm going to start back at square one and learning on the Vaettir. Now, for those who don't know, in modern Norse paganism and heathenry, the Vaettir are land spirits. There's also freshwater Vaettir, saltwater Vaettir. There's death Vaettir. A term that you might be a little more familiar with is white. But, I'm gonna try to basically start at square one about learning about these spirits again, and then seeing what that does, and then making videos on the specific ones. There's one that, believe it or not, the majority of you are probably familiar with, and that should be a fun video. But yes, thank you all for watching. So if you're starting back at square one for Vaettir, you have to actually define what they are, which is not the easiest thing to do. But as I said in my first video, the Vaettir are essentially spirits of the land, of bodies of water, and everything. You can find a Vaettir in both a specific rock, or, the corner of a field, or, even ones that can be an entire corner of a country. There's the 4 Vaettirs of Iceland, which a lot of people do bring reference to. But to actually specifically define them, they're basically just a large grouping of spirits of Scandinavia of religious significance, which is not always easy to find because different areas refer to Vaettirs as certain things. It kind of gets tossed around like the word Jotun to describe a lot of supernatural figures. So if they're difficult to define, how are they treated, and how do they come to be of such prominence in traditional and modern Norse pagan and heathenry? And the simplest answer that I can give to that still doesn't quite answer the question is that the Vaettir are the answer to animism in Norse traditions. The Vaettir are Norse animism. And the reason I say that might not be hard to define, because people can read the definition of animism and understand what it is on, I guess, an academic level, but not actually a personal level. I do think that is something you need to experience, and they became that way because there's different divisions. Ancestors, Vaettir, a lot of the mythical creatures, Vaettir. Now, when talking about Vaettir, there's a couple generally accepted groupings of Vaettir. Now, keep in mind there are Vaettir that exist outside of these, but these are the general groupings of Vaettir. You have the land Vaettir, which are spirits of, primarily your dry land that's easy to traverse. Your Fjall Vaettir, which are your mountain spirits. Your Sjö Vaettir, which are your sea spirits. Your Vatna Vaettir, which is your lakes, rivers, and pond spirits, other specific bodies of water. Skog Vaettir, which are your forest spirits, and your Hus Vaettir, which is your house spirits. And there are things like the Rud Vaettir that exist outside of these categories, but these are the main ones that you will regularly deal with. So, now you have at least a decent understanding of what the Vaettir are. How do you work with them? Well, admittedly, that's very individual, but they like offerings just like everything else. And generally do expect some kind of offering in return for their assistance. Now, generally, they like anything that evaporates pretty easily. So you can burn offerings, you can lay alcohol out, which will naturally evaporate, whether it's, mead, whiskey, the majority of those evaporate on their own. In lieu of anything like that, food offerings are well known. It doesn't, in my experience, it doesn't overly matter the kind of food, but, fruits, stuff like that, they seem to enjoy. Thank you for watching. These are Draugr. the Again Walkers, the risen dead of Norse mythology. To become a Draugr, a person had to have been either very malicious towards their fellow man, greedy, to have drowned, for their body to not have been in a horizontal position when they died, so for them to have been propped up vertically, or for them to have been sitting, or being killed by a Draugr may cause the victim to rise themselves. They were generally considered protectors of treasure. Now, the amount of treasure varies from tale to tale, from a single coin to enough to feed a family for generations. They are considered Vaettir, but they are not considered friendly to work with. Even if not necessarily evil, they were not considered something that you work with. Thank you for watching. The Draugr were also known to affect the surrounding area. Animals who have scavenged within the domain of a Draugr were said to exhibit signs of madness, and were effectively another wall of defense for the area. And while it wasn't necessarily, like possession, it certainly seemed to imply that the Draugr had some sort of influence on creatures, and the only way to destroy a Draugr was to separate its head from its body, to burn the bones, and to throw the ashes into a lake, river, or ocean. They're particularly stubborn because anything less than this would cause it to just reform and continue doing its thing. So yeah, they were particularly stubborn. Thank you for watching. Happy August 27th, everyone. Since we were all expecting something spooky to happen, I figured I'd share the myth of the Valraven. The Valraven is a normal raven that ate the heart of a slain warrior and gained the body of a wolf, effectively making it half wolf, half raven. They were generally seen as mischievous, and particularly known for terrorizing the Danish countryside with their shenanigans. And they've even made their way into Grimm's Brother fairy tales. Now, I don't know where this part of the myth comes from, so I don't know if it's Grimm's Brothers or not, but apparently this thing could become a knight if it either drank the blood or ate the heart of a child. Danes, man. Dragons have a long and dual-sided history in Norse and Scandinavian myth, seen as both protective, Vaettir, and antagonist in many cases. The Norsemen had a custom of putting an effigy of one on the front of their ships to protect them from malicious sea creatures, however, would remove them as to not scare the land Vaettir before they themselves docked. As antagonist, you can see this in the poem Beowulf, as well as the Deeds of the Danes, which holds a description of a dragon that was killed by King Frodo. As protective creatures, the most mainstream thing that you're really going to see is some iterations of the Nidhogger, which I'll do a separate video on, and in Iceland, the coat of arms has the 4 Vaettirs of Iceland, which are the main protectors of that country, and one of them is a troll serpent, which is the image of what today we would call a dragon. So in my last video in this series, I mentioned that the Nidhogger has a protective aspect. Now I am going to preface this by saying that this is definitely outside of mainstream academia on the subject, as well as more than likely mainstream Norse paganism, so there's that information for you. But the protective aspect still does the same thing. It still eats the roots of Yggdrasil, but instead of trying to make the tree fall, it is actually helping take care of it. It is taking care of basically the roots that have either rotted or become corrupted as to not spread it to the rest of the tree. There's also variations that it does this unknowingly, but yeah, just putting that out there, not telling anyone to believe anything, just putting it out there. But yeah, I just thought it was interesting and I figured I should make the video to explain that. Thank you. I recently got a shout out for this series, so thank you for Strange Heathen for that, and thank you to all of my new followers. And today's episode is going to be about the Tomta, the Homestead Man. A variety of other names, but they all effectively mean the same spirit, and it is an ancestral spirit that generally worked alone. There was generally only one of these per farmstead or household, and they did farming chores and other such things at night, and they were able to do this because despite their size of being no taller than 3 feet, they had enormous strength, so could do pretty much everything by themselves in a lot of time. And they generally had long white beards, red caps, and were the inspiration of today's Christmas elves and garden gnomes. Thank you so much